Hello, good morning, Sitaram, and welcome to another program in the series Addiction and Recovery. I'm your host, Ramnaresh Dwarika, and I'd like to welcome all our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago, of the Caribbean, and worldwide who are listening and following this program on the various media platforms. And just to remind you, this program is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube and Facebook soon after its completion this morning. And it will be repeated on radio and TV Jagriti again at 10 p.m. tonight. For those of you who are very busy and not able to follow the program in its entirety at this point in time, you can come back at your own convenience and look at it. And you can also use it as a resource. The postings on Facebook and YouTube, you can send that to anyone who you think may benefit from the content of the program, whom probably suffering with addiction in some form, and they can benefit from listening, and or you can post your comments or ask questions in the platforms, and I would respond to them. And this morning, I want to deal with a very, very troublesome, very interesting topic. Today I want to explore one of the toughest questions that families and communities face. And that is, how do we get addicts and alcoholics to seek help and to accept help? And why I've selected this topic after last week's program, when I dealt with the addiction that is hidden in plain sight, that is summarily dealing with people who still very functional, have a good job and everything, but they are alcoholics and they are suffering silently. And the people around them are really not recognizing because of the profiling that has been done with addiction. We generally worldwide, we tend to think that alcoholics and drug addicts are people who have reached a vagrancy, who have lost everything, who are unkempt, and who are on their last stage. And yes, they are alcoholics and drug addicts, but they have reached the chronic stage. And a lot of people who are alcoholics, but in the beginning or middle stage of alcoholism, go undetected and they continue to suffer. And the important thing, just like any other illness, if we pick it up early, early intervention can save people's lives. It can save their jobs, their family life, and indeed industries and society at large in the long run. So this is why it is important. I thought I'd deal with this topic because after the program, a very good friend of mine called me, and he knows of someone who he believes need the help after looking at the program. And but how to reach that person? Now there are a lot of people who are in the upper middle class and upper classes, and the people in the posh areas and so on, who have good jobs, they're well employed, and but they are addicted, and they're not likely to want to make that known to anyone else. And this morning, in this morning program, I want to look at some of the reasons why that is so. Because despite all the knowledge we have today, many people still suffer in silence, denying their problem or refusing help until almost too late. So today, I want to look at what keeps people from accepting help and what we, as loved ones, professionals, and as society, can do differently. So, I want to start off by making it very abundantly clear that addiction is not a moral failure. It's a disease that affects brain function, it affects the emotions, and it also affects the behavior. And to this extent, um, the World Health Authority the Pan American Health Association, indeed, our own government here in Trinidad and Tobago have accepted now that alcoholism and addiction is a disease. And so people don't get fired because you are diagnosed as an alcoholic or drug addict. Usually, the large companies, and there are places now that has employee assistance programs, and usually these people are sent for rehabilitation. Sometimes they go through the court system, sometimes they are directly referred to the treatment facilities, and a lot of them do well. And we'll explore that as we go along the program this morning. But one of the first barriers to seeking help and accepting help is the whole question of a defense mechanism that we all human beings have, and it's called denial. Denial is a core symptom. The brain protects the addiction by rationalizing and minimizing the problem. So, and I have often mentioned being a person in recovery myself, and I always recall one of my rallying rationalization was that, look, I didn't play cricket, I didn't play, I didn't gamble, I didn't play football. So if I took a few drinks, what was wrong with that? I felt it was justified, but that was a rationalization. So the person often says, well, and usually they say, well, look, I can stop anytime I want, and I'm not as bad as others. And we keep looking at the chronic alcoholic as I described at the beginning of the program, because generally the society, in most societies as I've worked and looked, we tend to only think of the alcoholic as the person who is the skid row drunk, who has lost his job and who is unkempt and, you know, ha- hanging around the bars and so on. But they are in the minority, I would tell you, because that's just before they pass away sometimes. But the majority of the alcoholics are still very functional. Most of them have a good job, have money in the bank, has a family and everything. But so as I say this, let me say at the outset, being an alcoholic is not really dependent on how much we drink, how often we drink, how we look, what we have lost, or the circumstances that we have attracted. Basically, an alcoholic is a person who has lost their control over their drinking, and all the other things happen as a result of that. And you can lose the control from the very outset. There are some people who are born with that genetic predisposition to alcoholism. And only when they continue to drink, they realize it escalates and takes them very quickly into repetitive, uncontrollable drinking and the consequential problems associated with being drunk and inebriated and so on. So a lot of people will tell you, they would have in the middle stage of alcoholism, you have the dromal and prodromal, that is how it's referred to. There's still some appearances of control, and they interpret that, okay, well, look, I did not drink because I had a prayers coming up, or the doctor, I was sick, or I had some serious crisis I had just experienced, and people stop for little periods of time. And that motivation to stop is based largely on fear of the consequences, or illness or some other, overwhelming influence that only lasts for a little while. It is said that, human crisis usually lasts only about 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, the person literally redefines the crisis. So fear will only help us to stay sober only for so long. Threats, like the person who goes before the court and the court threatens that, look, if you come back before me for drinking, you will go to prison. And the fear of that will probably keep them sober for a little while. But a person who has become addicted and dependent, it is very difficult without help for them to even, after a while, they'll forget the fear and they will attempt to be careful, but then the trick of it is that, you know, once you take that first drink, that is the hallmark of alcoholism. And a social drinker can take one, two, three drink and stop and go about their business. But the alcoholic may not drink for quite a long time, because of the fears I referred to. But once he takes that first drink, it seemed to awaken some deep down spirit inside of him that asks for more and more and more. And that is the distinction between the social drinker and the alcoholic. The alcoholic, once he takes that first drink, generally he would go on to drink more until he gets drunk, so that he loses control after the first drink. While he's not drinking, he appears to have some control. So that, why is denial? Why people insist on denying? They don't want to accept help. And how can we gently break through it without pushing the person away? So I want to share some tips this morning, with all those relatives and friends who are concerned about that other person who is drinking. So one of the first things we do, we use relatable examples. That is, for instance, we may want to say, look, the person would have known of someone or other friends who got into serious trouble because of the drinking, got charged by the police, went to prison, lost their job, lost their family, or got into a serious accident. You may want to, so that we can learn from the other person's experience and use that as a pivoting point, to become willing to do something about it. Or, you can also talk about relationships, that might have become under pressure because of drinking, as happens in a family, and speak about that. Now, it is important to emphasize empathy. I know confrontation is very often the natural method that a lot of family members use. The next day after the person vomited and made a mess or got into trouble or broke up the furniture, it is, natural for the other people to be angry and become confrontational and threaten. But that don't really work. That really pushes the person further away. On the other hand, it is important to use empathy. But that is very difficult when you yourself have not had a drinking problem. And this is one of the reasons people in recovery seem to have a better chance at reaching alcoholics and drug addicts than the average brother, sister, parent, or friend who does not have, who has not had the personal experience. It is very difficult to empathize, to put yourself in a position and really understand why the person is continuing to drink in spite of all that is happening. And then there are literally barriers to seeking help. Let me say, one is the shame. You know, the shame and the stigma associated with alcoholism and drug addiction. A lot of people are afraid of being judged, you know, or labeled or even rejected. And I know that. And this is why even when I realized, years before I stopped drinking, I realized I'm not stupid. I realized I do have a problem with alcohol. The people around me who were pointing it out to me and saying things, why you don't pay attention to your drinking, when you're drinking, you don't seem to want to stop and all that kind of thing. And I realized, I would realize that, look, I need to do something about it. But because of the shame and the stigma associated with it, I wanted to fix it myself. And there are many, many people out there who, alcoholics are not foolish people. Sometimes most of the time, alcoholics are very, very skilled, very, very intelligent, and very, very nice people, very intelligent, but, and who has a lot of control over so many other things. But when it comes to alcohol, they seem not to have any control. And that has had been my experience. So, we are fed on a diet of becoming self-sufficient and independent by our parents and our society ever since we were kids. You're big enough now to tie your shoelace. You're old enough now to take care of your personal hygiene. You're old enough to take responsibility. So we are fed on a diet and we get rewarded the more and more self-sufficient and independent we become. And then we now we become addicted to alcohol and can't believe and understand why. We seem to have willpower power over everything, over our employees, over our relationships, over so many other things. But when it came to alcohol, our willpower seemed to melt, you know. And I had that experience personally. So it's very difficult. For years, a lot of people struggle right into the gates of hell and insanity, still trying to control because they are fearful of being judged and labeled by the people around them. And then there's a real question of the fear of withdrawal or change. You see, the unknown is always very scary. Substances provide a false sense of comfort. Now, there is the withdrawal from the actual drugs. Anyone who has become dependent on any psychotropic drug, mood altering substance, alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, these drugs, a lot of people use to self medicate to help them to cope with depression, anxiety, and sometimes they're used in conjunction with prescription pills as well because they were diagnosed as being anxious or depressed. And they can't even imagine a life without it. How are they going to function? They will not be able to sleep. When they get up the next morning and their heart palpitating and they're depressed and they're crying, they can't go to work. And so now they find comfort in in supplementing whatever they're using with the drug or using the drugs to help them to cope. So that, and the few times they might have stopped in the past, they had such bad experiences with the withdrawal. Some people actually hallucinate or they 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 suffer with insomnia, the loss of appetite, they become very irritable, argumentative, they become depressed, anxious, all of those things. And this could be very scary for the person. So that rather than go through that again, they just decide to look, drink, or use the drugs. And there's another rationalization that comes to mind. I would say, but look, if you drink or smoke, you would die. But if you didn't drink or smoke, you'd still die. So I enjoy drinking and smoking. So I chose to drink and smoke. And that, of course, the truth was I had made so many vain attempts to stop and couldn't. So that one of the this and I know relatives and friends have a difficulty understanding this because this is something you really have to experience the withdrawal symptoms. Reading about it, hearing about it really doesn't give you that first-hand experience. So that there's a lot of people who even, have had, they mistrust the systems. They would have gone into rehab a few times. They've gone to AA, they have gone to counseling, and still went back and drank or relapsed. And now not only them, their family has lost hope as well. That look, we have tried everything and nothing seemed to work. This person seemed to be consigned to a life of addiction until they die. And everybody just wait and hoping that something will happen and he will disappear one of these days. And I have had the experience of speaking to alcoholics and drug addicts who have literally been abandoned by their families and their friends. And who's to blame? One is, and that's the reason for this program, because families and friends need to understand. I'm not making an excuse for alcoholics and addicts. I do understand what families and friends go through when a person connected to them is an alcoholic or drug addict. I am aware of it. It is not easy. In fact, a lot of times, spouses, wives end up, I mean, having to get mental help because of they having to live with an alcoholic or drug addict. Family members suffer because they have to deal with all of these things on a sober head. He, on the other hand, or she, when they face with a situation, they just escape by using the drugs. So family members do really suffer. But again, the alcoholic and the drug addict is also suffering. And the lack of understanding from the people around them makes it even more difficult. And not only difficult, sometimes the lack of understanding actually perpetuates the person's alcoholism and their drug addiction because they, without realizing it, they enable the person to continue to be sick by making excuses for them, covering up for them, hiding the problems, and not really dealing with it. So hopefully before the end of the program, I would share some tips of how family members can deal with this. Then, of course, there's a lack of resources. Even where a lot of people might be inclined, you get them to to realize, you help them to develop insight. They realize they have a problem, but then there's a lack of resources in Trinidad. For instance, we only have a limited amount of bed spaces at Cowra Hospital. There's a long waiting list. A lot of people get lost while they're on that waiting list because they just go back and relapse. They just can't wait because from personal experience and experience in the field, it is important when an alcoholic or a drug addict decides to go seek help, they need it like yesterday. There must be resources available to deal with it right away. And thank God we have practitioners like myself who treat with it in an urgent manner. So that I'll speak a little bit about that. The fact of the matter is that we do have facilities in Trinidad, but again, because of the stigma, a lot of people don't want to go to a public institution, especially people in the middle and upper classes. They don't want to go to a public institution. They don't want to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. So for those people who are concerned about that, I want to let them know that now we have Alcoholics Anonymous meetings online where you don't have to physically go there. And in the online meetings, the Zoom platforms, you can turn off your video. You can put a sobriquet. You don't have to put your own name. And you can attend the meetings. And I know that there are a lot of people, especially women, who were fearful of going to AA meetings in the past because of the predominance of men in those meetings. And of course, the social stigma. They are now going online, you know, in the privacy of their home and their room, even from their family. They can seclude themselves and attend the meeting. They can wear earphones, and so that nobody hears what other people are saying in the meeting, and everything is confidential. So you have that. And then a lot of people choose to go to private practitioners like myself, where you can come on a one-on-one situation and very confidentially, and you can be counseled and treated. In my case, I also offer acupuncture, which can effectively deal with the physical withdrawal and psychological withdrawal symptoms, and counseling. And for those people who are willing, I share with them the resources that are available, the physical meetings and the online meetings. So taken together, they can effectively substitute for in-house program um, to a large extent, I would say. And a lot of people are using this route to help themselves out of the addiction. In fact, after this program, I have a gentleman who's a professional who will be coming to, and he's now, he's told me 60 days sober. And and he's just attending the online meetings and coming to the counseling sessions. So there are options. It's up to the persons to to seek these options. But again, for the general public, yes, the lack of rehab centers and affordable care has always been a challenge because a lot of the majority people, when they reach to addiction, they can't afford uh, one-on-one counseling sessions, and some people don't even have internet access and all of that. So yes, there are those people who would find it challenging to to and societies and communities need to look at these things so that the problem is that many people don't refuse help because they don't want it. They refuse because they fear that it may not work because they've never stayed sober before. I could understand that because if you have never experienced something, there's always the fear of the unknown. So I want to let you know that if you're listening this morning and you're struggling to reach someone you love, remember, it's not about forcing help. It's about keeping the door open with compassion. So that, yes, you would have spoken to the person and they of course put up a front and no, I don't think I haven't gone so bad yet. I don't think I need that help. That's the usual story. I can stop when I want, and sometimes they even go so far as to tell you why you don't mind your business, and become abusive and all of that. But you should not get discouraged because as I related in that past program, although I was approached, some 2 years before and that I should seek help. The person planted a seed that 2 years later, when, as we say in Trinidad, water more than flour, I accepted the invitation and I sought help for myself. So some of the effective strategies is motivational interviewing, you know, a gentle conversation that explores their reasons for change, helping them to make connections. That is very important. There's a lot of people who will come to me, and for instance, I have found family members who are very innovative. There's this old lady who told her son, who was an alcoholic, in her opinion, that look, she said that she was having a lot of bodily aches and she needed him to bring her so that I could treat her with acupuncture. I also I do generalized acupuncture, and I treat other conditions like back pain and even strokes and all of those things. So she came, he brought her to see me, and she said, well, she pointed out, yes, she genuinely had some aches and pains and so on. And then in the conversation, she brought it up. She said, but sir, when this boy go out drinking, I just can't sleep. I'll be worried, I'll be stressed out. You know, I wish you could talk to him. And he was taken by surprise, but he was receptive. And I am being a professional. I know how to handle these things. And I gently said, well, boy, look, not everybody who drink is alcoholic, but sometimes, people can be alcoholics without even realizing it. And I do this for all my patients who come with that problem or who are brought to me. I don't jump to the conclusion because the family members say they are alcoholic. They are alcoholic. I do a fair assessment, professional objective assessment to determine whether they are still social drinker, heavy drinker, or whether they are alcoholic. And then if having made that determination, if they're not alcoholic, I tell them so. And if they are, then I also tell them and I share with them why I'm saying that. I point to the evidence and I help patients to make the connection between the problems they are experiencing, whether it be health, financial, relationship, or whatever, with their drinking. I show the connection. I teach them to 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 do what is called consequential thinking. That look, it is not the friends that caused the problem the last time I got into trouble. It was if I wasn't drinking, I wouldn't be there. I wouldn't be driving, and the police wouldn't have charged me. So it is the drinking. You understand? And it is from helping them to develop insight that the motivation to stop comes. You break through the denial. So that the important thing is too is to also allow them to speak. Now, when family members speak, a lot of times they have already decided you need to do something, you need to go to rehab, you need to get out of our face. You understand? And they just, throw down the gauntlet and they speak in that kind of way. But they don't listen to the person. But a professional trained counselor would listen and realize, you let them speak, they let them, there's a benefit even in allowing them to ventilate, because it may probably the first time they're getting to speak to somebody who's really listening to them, hearing why it is they have had to resort to drinking. Because sometimes there's a lot of pressures generated within the family circle, that perpetuate the person's drinking. There might have been incidents out of the person's control that might have precipitated their drinking in the first place, you know. So there are, of course, and we've seen this on TV, family-led guided intervention method, guided by a counselor and so on. And this is done in a loving and not angry way, where I've seen family members write letters, that they read about how they feel when their father, when the child reads, when my father came home drunk, how I felt, what happened, how it affected me. And not really confronting, I would rather say carefronting the person, letting them know that, look, this is what happens. I know of an instance where this child spoke with a teacher at school about the father's drinking every night. He was drunk, and the teacher asked the child to ask the father to come to the school, and the teacher did a very good job, you know, of speaking to the father and letting the father know that, look, when the child is sleeping in class, because they were not able to sleep all night last night, and the father really moved by that decided to do something about the drinking, and is sober now many years as a result. So that kind of intervention can. So as I say this, one of the best times to speak to an alcoholic or drug addict is like the next morning, when they are not under the influence, but they are beginning for themselves to realize they're feeling sick. Their body is telling them, hey, you can't continue to do this. That would be the best time. And you don't speak down to the alcoholic. You let them know, look, I do understand alcoholism is an illness. And, a lot of people would have started to use it recreationally, but you don't even know when it starts to move from recreational to uncontrollable. And, you know, as I said earlier on, how much you drink and how often you drink doesn't really determine whether you're alcoholic. Is when you take that first drink, what happens? And you ask the person to reflect on how many times, with all good intention, they just went to take one or two, but they stayed to get drunk. And that is an eye opener for a lot of people, because that is true for alcoholics. They will go to just take one or two, and then they'll eventually end up drunk, not planning to get drunk. But a lot of families, they as I said, they, 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 they literally mandate you, either rehab or nothing. And that don't really help very much. Instead of saying you need rehab, say you deserve to feel better, and we can explore what you might look like, at doing together. And you offer to assist, and in that respect, I know family members even said, well, look, I spoke with Mr. Dwarika, who does this program, and they showed them the program, had them refer to the YouTube channel that I have. And then they agreed, okay, they will come to see me. And the process started there, and people have managed, a lot of people have benefited from that way, that route, you know, so that, families must stop enabling while still showing love and consistency. You understand? So maybe in the future, I would look at this whole question of tough love, where We love the person. We let them know we are concerned, but we don't continue to enable them by making excuses and paying the pusher and all of that. We have to make it very clear that we are not going to become enablers. Community programs, faith groups, and recovery networks can provide a sense of belonging. And that is one of the things that a lot of people in rehab centers, when I worked at Cora, we encouraged people when they were discharged as outpatients. Well, there was an outpatient program that they came back every Tuesday, but we encouraged them to join AA groups in their communities. We also encouraged them to go back to their temples and their churches because the human being, we are social animals, and when a person was drinking, they surrounded themselves with people who drank and behave in the similar manner. Alcoholics don't really feel comfortable with social drinkers. They tend to choose people like themselves to associate with. So that when you stop drinking or when you go on that path to recovery, you have to stay away from all these drinking friends and partners and occasions. And that leads to a kind of isolation and loneliness. So that this is why it is important for people in recovery to quickly join a support groups, community groups, either AA or NA, or go to your temple and get involved in social activities. For instance, in my own case, I immediately got involved. When I stopped drinking, I realized I ended up having a lot of free time. So all those things I always wanted to do and never had time to do it, or was, you know, derailed from doing it by my drinking and alcohol. I went back. I went back to school and started to study. I started to learn to play music. I became involved with as a resource person with the Caribbean Institute on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction. I was affiliated with the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction as well. And then I became involved in community activities with the nursery school, secretary of the nursery school board here where I live. And currently I'm a director at the National Council of Indian Culture. And the sky has been, now I do these radio and television programs. I've been doing them since 1993. So all of these things, the horizon opened for me once I stopped drinking. And the same can happen with anyone. I've seen that replicated with so many other people. I know a young man who was literally in the streets here in my community, almost to vagrancy, who stopped drinking. He could not read at the time, but he learned to read and went and got his license. And now he has his own vehicles, not only a vehicles, he got a job in the government. He retired too, so as a sober person. So that the stories that you hear when you go to AA meetings and so on and in recovery are really, really heartwarming and revealing as to what you can do. Peers in recovery, those who have walked the road, seem to be best able, to help the person because they can identify. And they are often the most convincing voices, and to this extent, the AA groups, even those people who are in denial, a lot of people were pressured to go to the meetings because they got charged by the police and had to produce letters from AA showing that they were attending meetings, or they were pressured by the employer, or sometimes because of the estrangement from the spouse who insisted you have to do something about your drinking. And it doesn't matter what brought them to AA or to treatment. The important thing is once they came and they were shown that there are alternatives. There are ways to stop and how they can cope with being able to stay in recovery. A lot of them choose recovery at that point, and they have been able to stay sober. So that, I want to encourage anyone listening, you don't have to wait till you go that bad. Because as I said earlier on, a lot of people can be born alcoholics and only realize it when they start drinking. Because those will be the kind of people, as soon as they start, they want to drink to get drunk. And that was me. When I ain't drinking, I ain't drinking. But when I drinking, I say, yeah, you all come to talk or you'll come to drink. You understand? But the truth was, I probably had inherited the genes to become alcoholic. So, you know, the important thing is that help is available. You know, there's a lot of people, there are several ways a person might eventually seek help. Employers have a very, very important role here, supervisors who can, because a lot of alcoholics will not seek help. I've heard mothers threaten, well, I'll stop talking to you if you don't, if, I'll stop having a relationship with you. And alcoholics will just smile because in their mind, they just say, well, at least one person is going to stop nagging me now. Or the same thing happens with the wife. When the wife threatens, I will leave you if you continue to drink. The active alcoholic, he in his mind, he says, well, look, if you go away, I will have more freedom. But when the employer says, you go to Cora or you go on to AA or do something about your drinking, otherwise, I'm going to cut your lifeline. That means you're going to lose your salary and your money to support your habit. A lot of alcoholics and addicts listen to that. They will go begrudgingly, under duress at first. And this is where people like myself who work in treatment rehab centers have a responsibility, because although your client might have been referred and come to you under duress, becomes your responsibility to help them to develop insight, you know, so that they will eventually be able to think consequentially and accept help. That is critical. And so that the process sometimes, a lot of people may come on their own, as again, if the opportunity arises, and I've discussed in previous programs the different challenges. It is more difficult for women to seek and accept help than it is for men, because in Trinidad, for instance, there are more facilities for men than there is for women. And as I say that, I might just want to highlight that, the New Life Ministries have started a rehab center at Palaseco in South Trinidad for women, and there's the Serenity Place for Women in Cochrane Village in Point 14. So I know a lot of women who are addicted, and more women are becoming predisposed to alcoholism now because more and more women entering the workforce and having their own disposable income. So, and they are now more and more likely to be seen in bars on a Friday evening, hanging out with the girls and all of that. That is a culture that is changing right now. So we are going to be expecting more and more women to become alcoholics. And we need to put things in place, social services in place to cater for this. We should not wait until it happens. So that I want to let those people who are, who might have been to treatment several times and probably relapsed, I just want to let you know that, look, a lot of times relapse is part of recovery. Some people will relapse a few times before they eventually make it. But in life, if you fall, you don't stay down. You pick up yourself and you dust yourself off and you go again. We only fail when we stop trying. Once you continue to try, you have not failed. So that help actually works. But the person must feel understood and not attacked. Addiction thrives in silence and denial, but recovery begins with honesty and hope. If you're listening and struggling, or someone you love or love someone who is, reach out today. Recovery is possible, help is available, and no one is beyond saving. So that in Trinidad and Tobago, we have the National uh, Drug Treatment Center at Cora Hospital, the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment Center. You can go there on a Thursday. The clinics are on Thursdays from 8 o'clock. If you have a referral from your doctor, that is fine. If you don't have a referral, you can still go. They will do an assessment, and if they if, and they will make a determination whether you are suitable for the inpatient program or the outpatient program or whatever. So you would be enrolled in some program there once the diagnosis is made. There is also so many support groups in Trinidad and Tobago. You have Alcoholics Anonymous. Their number is 495-8403. 495-8403. And the offices are located at Light Pole 52 Rivulet Road, Bishing Castle, Cuba. And their email address is cigan52@hotmail.com. Sorry, cigaa52@hotmail.com. So you can reach them by email. And if you, of course, if you're interested, you can call me after the program. I'll give you the information. And then there's a lot of non-governmental organizations like Rebirth House in Port of Spain. They are on Charlotte Street, Port of Spain. There's the New Life Ministries at Mount St. Benedict. And as I said, they have a branch in Palo Seco. There is the Serenity Place. There used to be the Piparo Empowerment Center, and I'm hoping that they will reconsider now using that place as a treatment facility. And of course, you have private practitioners like myself who are available. There are the faith-based community outreach programs as well. You know, finally, you can't make someone want help. You can't make someone want help, but you can make help look safe, loving, and possible. So if you would like, if you know someone who you think needs help, as I said, all these programs are posted, all my programs that I do on radio and TV Jagriti are posted on my YouTube channel. You just put in my name, Ram Naresh Dwarika, Addiction and Recovery on YouTube, and all the programs are there. They are also posted under the same heading in Facebook. And I've done programs on various aspects of alcoholism and drug addiction, the resources and methods of staying sober. You have all that information there. And of course, you can also call me at 671-3040 or 768-5925. You can text me on that number. I have WhatsApp there, and I'll be only willing to help you. So I want to thank all of you who have been listening to the program, following on the various media platforms, and to let you know it was really a privilege for me to share this information with you, and hope that you all, I know this weekend you have Diwali coming up soon. I want to wish everyone a happy and safe Diwali. Children, careful how you're lighting the diyas and so on. Sometimes I see people right on the street of where I live here in Felicity. There's always a grand celebration. Actually, it's becoming a tourist destination. So if I could put a plug for them. But these lighted diyas and people wearing long shalwars and saris and so on. And sometime in conversation, you may step back and your sari just touches a lighting diya and so on. And that could be a disaster for you, for not only for your costume, clothes, but for you as well. So please be careful. For those people who are not electricians, careful you're not overloading your circuits with too many lights at this time. Share the burden of the lighting on various, outlets, or consult with someone who knows about it. And have an enjoyable Diwali celebration with your family. And until next week, Thursday, I'll see you all again, God's willing. So thank you. And I want to thank Radio and TV Jagriti for hosting this program as a community service free of charge for all our brothers and sisters out there. And they've been doing this almost from the very inception of the station. So I want to thank them and thank the operators, Jason Kalu and Mr. Bimal and all of them in the back who facilitate this program every week. So thank you. Until next week. Goodbye and Sitaram.